Welcome back. I'm joined by Harold Pinter, winner of the 2005 Nobel Prize in Literature, an outspoken critic of US foreign policy. We're honored to have him on the show. Mr. Pinter, I just want to ask you a little bit about the work that you do as a playwright. I know you've said you've essentially now decided you're going to stop writing so much and concentrate on the political activism, but you have been a political activist for the last 2 decades at least. Did you ever think that what you say in the sort of political arena might make its way back into the way people regard your artistic work, that they might see it tainted and not as pure artistic work?
Well, that's up to them. I mean, art is not, the old concept of art being an ivory tower is long gone, I think. Art is the theatre, shall we say, rather than the term art, is part of the world. And the world includes all political issues. So political issues hold a very strong card in any serious body of work. It's, we don't live in a vacuum. We certainly don't live in an artistic vacuum. We live in a very, very harsh, hard, tough world, which is right on our, outside our doors now, or even inside our homes. I mean, I think, I'm veering away slightly from your question perhaps, but it does strike me that there's a great abyss between the language we use, certainly politicians tend to use, and the actual consequences of their actions, which are mutilated people, hundreds of thousands of corpses, children massacred, and so on and so on. These are the real facts, and you can't keep any serious artist, if you like, must take cognizance of those facts and in one way or the other, without being a propagandist, include them in his work. I think it's a serious obligation. It's also unavoidable.
So we're going to bring in George from Jerusalem, who's joined us on the line. George, thanks for being our first caller. What's your question to Harold Pinter, please? George, can you hear us? We'd like to have your question.
It's not really a question. I just would like him to. I would like to hear a comment. Beg your pardon?
A comment, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead, George.
Yes, a comment by Mr. Pinter on how he feels about the alliance between the U.S. and Israel.
Okay, Mr. Pinter, a comment about the alliance between the U.S. and Israel from George in Jerusalem.
Well, I feel it's very destructive. I think what Israel is doing is shameful. I think the persecution, the humiliation of the Palestinian people is appalling. And it's an everyday fact of life over there. If you just look at the roadblocks, what do you call them? The people who can't get, Palestinians who can't get ambulances through, who can't go to school, who are blocked off from their lives, really, whose houses are blown up, whose orchards are blown up. These are barbaric facts, and I feel that I am disgusted by what the Israeli government is doing, actually.
Well, sir, we will get more...
Therefore, I think...
We'll get more viewer calls in. One thing I did want to touch on a little bit more before we get back to the political activism is just a little bit, while we have you, talk about your work, because it's a rare chance to talk with you about your playwriting and the work, the way you form it, if you like. And I was fascinated to read how it comes up, that you say, you were writing about your early plays, you would have random thoughts and they would develop a life of their own. Now I wonder, as time has gone on and you've become more politically active and so on, whether that process has changed, that it's perhaps more cluttered by memories and perhaps political thoughts.
No, I don't think so. I think that the act of writing remains mysterious. Just because I am politically very active and engaged doesn't mean to say I can just sit down and write what's called a political play. All plays are the same. You have to start from an image or a word or not even an idea in my experience, but just something which sparks the thing off. I write a lot of poetry, and I find that's exactly the same principle. The same principle obtains.
Sir, as far as your approach now to what you will focus on, let's get some idea. You've said you take a backseat from the writing. That's not going to happen. I mean, is that really the case? Are you not going to write anymore at all?
I'm writing a lot of poetry, and it's in a sense. I don't know whether it's political poetry or not, but a lot of it was certainly inspired by this appalling invasion of Iraq I've written a volume called War, in fact. But I want to come back to a question you asked me, and I feel that it's very important that all the people who voted on ostensibly democratic procedures, who voted the USA and the British government into power, why did they do that? Why did they continue to do that? I think they do it because they feel themselves to be quite powerless. They have no, they know that they have no, that they're out of their element, that the politicians and the money men, by the way, the great big multinational companies, are actually running the world. And they feel bewildered. That is why I'm very inspired by what is happening at the moment in Venezuela and Bolivia. And I think that's a real resistance to this kind of multinational, worldwide global power. And I think that's very gratifying.
Now, you'd mentioned that you felt one of the issues was people don't speak out, that, you know, countries, governments can get away with things because people don't speak out. An email we had from Mark Schlegel in California in the US wants to say, remind Mr. Pinter that in fact the American news program Democracy Now! And reporter Amy Goodman do talk very much about these issues, as does the progressive organization MoveOn.org. The corporate-controlled media and corrupt legislators do not, but that will change since we will now have Al-Jazeera presenting a more realistic worldview. Thanks, Mark, for supporting us. And I want to ask you, Mr. Pinter, if you feel that the media has taken, at least up to now, we hope we can change things a bit, but the media has taken a back seat in terms of responsibility for getting the public, or keeping the public informed.
Yes, I do. I think the media has been really palpably complicit in what, with governments, with certainly these two governments we're talking about, and allowing them just following by rote what they're doing and not really being critical. Of course there are exceptions to this, and I'm very happy to be on Al-Jazeera at this very moment because I think you are an exception. But the fact is that, of course I know, may I just say to your correspondent just now, that when I was when I did my Nobel speech, I received, well, I have to say, thousands of emails and letters and so on after it, many of them from the United States, from people who are actually really ashamed of what they were doing and what their government was doing in, as it were, their name. So I'm well aware that there are lots of Americans who don't share their government's views. And we've just seen that, as I was saying, demonstrated by the Democratic vote in the elections for Congress just now.
Ali in Edmonton in Canada has joined us on the line, Mr. Pinter. So Ali in Canada, go ahead with your question, please.
Thank you. I have a question. How the International Court of Justice can bring the leaders just like George Bush or Blair or any leaders who abuse their powers? That's my question, sir.
So it's again referring back to what you said, Mr. Pinter, about the International Court of Justice, how it might effectively bring leaders into power. I think you pointed out there are problems there.
There are problems indeed. And President Bush has made it very, very clear by not ratifying the International Criminal Court of Justice and by bullying people who have ratified the court. He has made it quite clear that if any American soldier or if any American politician is actually arraigned willy-nilly by the International Court, he will send in the Marines. And when he says he'll send in the Marines, I'm sure he will be at the very, he will lead them into the court and shoot everyone inside.
Mr.
And
Pinter,
rescue his colleagues.
Thank you, sir. One thing, just on a personal note, I was very sorry to hear about your battle with cancer of the esophagus, and I wonder how it's perhaps changed your perspective on the need to get things done. I mean, and I read your poem on cancer cells. I wonder how it's changed your perspective on what you need to get done.
Well, yes, the closer you are to death, the more you recognize that things really do need to get done, to be looked at, to be properly scrutinized before it's too late. I'm still going, and I intend to keep that up. But it also makes you very well aware, even more than ever, of what actual mass murder is. I mean, we've witnessed so much mass murder in this whole last century, and even now in this century also. And you realize that death is right on the doorstep, and that more than that, not just your own death, but the death of others is happening every day of the week. So I think it's a responsibility
Right.
to.
Mr. Prompter, we wish you a long life.